Standing in front of 200 of my colleagues in the Harmony conference room at Meridian Healthcare Solutions, I held up a manila folder that would destroy everything Jessica Walsh had built in the past 6 months. The room was buzzing with excitement about the new wellness initiative launch, but I could see Jessica's face drain of color from her position at the front of the room. She had just finished her presentation about identifying employees who might be mentally unfit for their current responsibilities when I raised my hand and asked to address the room. "I'd like to share some insights about our wellness coordinator's methods," I said, my voice carrying across the silent auditorium. "Specifically, how she's been conducting her mental health evaluations and who's been helping her develop these assessment criteria." Jessica's microphone trembled in her hand as I continued. "Because I think everyone should know that our wellness coordinator has been getting very personal guidance from my husband, Mark Thompson, during their private evening sessions that I have documented here, along with their text exchanges about which employees need to be flagged as problematic." The silence that followed was deafening. Mark, sitting in the executive row, looked like he'd just been punched in the stomach. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." My name is Lisa Thompson, and 6 months ago, I thought I had everything figured out. At 38, I was the marketing manager at Meridian Healthcare Solutions in Austin, Texas, leading a team of 8 talented professionals who respected my work and trusted my judgment. I'd been with the company for 8 years, climbing steadily through the ranks while maintaining what I believed was a solid marriage to Mark, who held a senior operations director position in the same building where I worked every day. Our daughter Emma was 16, thriving in her junior year at Westwood High School, and showing early signs of the same analytical mind that had served me well in my career. She was planning to study business like her mother, and I couldn't have been prouder. Mark and I had been married for 12 years, and while we'd had our rough patches like any couple, I genuinely believed we were stronger for having weathered those storms together. The irony wasn't lost on me that we both worked for a healthcare technology company that prided itself on employee wellness and work-life balance. Meridian Healthcare Solutions had built its reputation on creating software that helped hospitals and clinics better serve their patients. But internally, we also focused heavily on ensuring our own staff felt supported and valued. It was one of the reasons I'd stayed so long, even when headhunters occasionally called with offers from larger firms in Dallas or Houston. Our offices occupied a sleek 6-story building in downtown Austin, with the marketing department on the 3rd floor, in an open-concept space that encouraged collaboration. I had a corner desk with a view of the Texas State Capitol building, and I'd made it my own with family photos, a small succulent garden, and the various awards our team had won for campaign excellence over the years. Mark's office was 2 floors. Up in the executive wing, a corner space with glass walls that spoke to his position in the company hierarchy. We'd fallen into a comfortable routine over the years. Mark would usually leave for work about 20 minutes before me, claiming he needed the extra time to review reports and prepare for morning meetings. I'd drop Emma at school when she wasn't driving herself, then arrive at the office by 8:30, coffee in hand and ready to tackle whatever creative challenges awaited. Most evenings, Mark would text that he was working late on operations issues, so Emma and I would have dinner together, sharing stories about our days and working on her college preparation. I loved my work at Meridian. Marketing in the healthcare technology space required a unique blend of technical understanding and creative communication skills. We had to take complex software solutions and translate them into compelling messages that would resonate with hospital administrators, doctors, and IT directors who were all dealing with their own pressures and constraints. My team had developed several award-winning campaigns that helped position Meridian as an industry leader, and I took genuine pride in knowing that our work was ultimately helping healthcare providers deliver better patient care. The 3rd floor marketing space was my second home. Sarah Chen, my closest colleague and friend, worked in the cubicle adjacent to my corner spot. She was a brilliant content strategist who'd joined the company around the same time I did, and we'd developed the kind of professional partnership where we could finish each other's sentences during brainstorming sessions. Sarah was a single mother raising her 10-year-old son David on her own, and I admired her strength and dedication. We often grabbed lunch together in the building's cafeteria or walked to the Starbucks on 6th Street when we needed to escape the office environment for strategic planning discussions. Our marketing team had a strong culture of collaboration and mutual support. We celebrated each other's successes, covered for each other during busy periods, and maintained the kind of professional relationships that made coming to work genuinely enjoyable. I'd worked hard to create an environment where everyone felt valued and heard, from our newest junior associate to our most experienced creative director. It was the kind of leadership style I'd developed over years of observing what worked and what didn't in corporate environments. Mark's operations department was quite different from our marketing team dynamic. Operations at Meridian was more hierarchical and formal, dealing with the complex logistics of software implementation, client support, and system maintenance. Mark managed a team of 15 people across various specialties, and his role required him to interface regularly with our biggest clients when technical issues arose. He was good at his job, methodical and detail-oriented in ways that complemented my more creative approach to problem-solving. Our marriage had evolved over the 12 years we'd been together. We'd met in college at the University of Texas, where Mark was studying business operations and I was pursuing my marketing degree. He was charming and ambitious, with clear goals about climbing the corporate ladder and building financial security for his future family. I was drawn to his confidence and his ability to make decisions quickly, traits that seemed to promise stability and partnership. After graduation, we'd both landed entry-level positions at different companies in Austin. Mark started in operations at a smaller tech firm, while I began my career at a marketing agency that specialized in healthcare clients. We dated for 3 years before getting engaged, and I remember feeling like we were building something solid together. Mark proposed during a weekend trip to San Antonio at sunset overlooking the River Walk, and it felt like the natural next step in a relationship that had grown steadily stronger over time. Emma came along 4 years into our marriage, and those early parenting years had tested us in ways we hadn't anticipated. Mark struggled with the sleepless nights and the constant demands of caring for an infant, often retreating to his home office to work on projects when Emma was fussy or needed attention. I found myself handling most of the nighttime feedings and diaper changes, telling myself that it was natural for the mother to take on more of those responsibilities, especially since I was breastfeeding. When Emma was 2, I made the decision to transition from the marketing agency to Meridian Healthcare Solutions. The move represented a significant step up in terms of both salary and responsibility, and it meant I could provide better financial stability for our growing family. Mark had already been at Meridian for 2 years at that point, having impressed the leadership team with his systematic approach to operations management. Having both parents working at the same company created some interesting dynamics, but we generally managed to keep our professional and personal lives appropriately separated. Over the years, Mark continued advancing through the operations hierarchy while I built my reputation in marketing. We developed a comfortable division of labor at home, with me handling most of Emma's school-related activities and Mark taking care of home maintenance and financial planning. Our social life revolved largely around Emma's activities and occasional company events, with the occasional date night when we could coordinate our schedules and find reliable childcare. I knew my husband well after 12 years of marriage. Mark was organized and logical, sometimes to a fault. He planned our vacations months in advance, maintained detailed spreadsheets for household expenses, and approached most decisions with the same methodical thinking he applied to his work. He wasn't particularly romantic in the traditional sense, but he showed his love through practical gestures, like making sure my car was serviced regularly, or researching the best schools for Emma's future college applications. Mark had always been somewhat reserved about his emotions, preferring to process things internally rather than talking through problems or concerns. When we did have disagreements, He tended to shut down rather than engage in lengthy discussions about feelings or relationship dynamics. I'd learned to respect his need for space during stressful periods, trusting that he would eventually come around and address whatever issues were bothering him. Our physical relationship had settled into a comfortable pattern over the years, less passionate than in our early dating days, but still warm and connected. We were affectionate with each other in front of Emma, holding hands during family movie nights or sharing quick kisses when one of us left for work. Mark still complimented my appearance and seemed genuinely proud when I received recognition for my professional achievements. Work at Meridian had been going particularly well for both of us in recent years. Mark had been promoted to Senior Operations Director 18 months earlier, a role that came with increased responsibility for client relationships and strategic planning. My marketing team had won several industry awards, and I'd been given additional budget and staff to expand our digital marketing capabilities. We'd talked about the possibility of both of us continuing to advance within the company, maybe eventually reaching the executive level where we could have even more influence on Meridian's direction and culture. Emma was thriving as well, maintaining excellent grades while participating in debate team and volunteer work at a local animal shelter. She'd started talking seriously about college plans, expressing interest in studying business with a focus on sustainable healthcare practices. Mark and I were both proud of her maturity and independence, and we'd begun the process of visiting colleges and exploring scholarship opportunities. The future felt secure and predictable in the best possible way. We had steady careers at a company we respected, a daughter who was growing into an impressive young woman, and a marriage that felt solid even if it wasn't particularly exciting. I wasn't looking for dramatic changes or grand romantic gestures. I was content with the life we'd built together, grateful for the stability and partnership that allowed both of us to pursue our professional goals while providing Emma with a loving, supportive home environment. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was to believe that contentment and routine were the same thing as happiness and fulfillment. I'd mistaken the absence of major problems for the presence of genuine connection. I'd assumed that because Mark and I functioned well as a team in managing our household and raising Emma, our marriage was strong and resilient. The truth was, I'd stopped paying attention to the subtle changes in Mark's behavior and priorities. I'd normalized his increasing absences from family dinners, his distraction during conversations, and his tendency to stay late at the office for what he described as important operations meetings. I'd accepted his explanations without question because I trusted him completely, and because our life together appeared to be working well from the outside. I had no reason to suspect that Mark was capable of the kind of deception that would eventually shatter everything I believed about our marriage and our shared commitment to honesty and loyalty. I certainly never imagined that his betrayal would be orchestrated through our workplace, using his position of authority to create opportunities for an affair that would ultimately threaten not just our marriage, but my professional reputation and mental health as well. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The stage was set for a revelation that would force me to question everything I thought I knew about the man I'd loved for 15 years and trusted with my future. But on that ordinary Tuesday morning in October, 6 months before everything fell apart, I was still blissfully unaware that my husband had already begun the process of replacing me in his affections with someone who would soon have the power to destroy my career and my sense of self-worth. Everything changed on a rainy Thursday morning in March when Tom Rodriguez from Human Resources sent out a company-wide email announcing our newest hire. Jessica Walsh would be joining Meridian Healthcare Solutions as our first-ever workplace wellness coordinator, a position that had been created to address what our CEO, Michael Foster, described as the growing need for comprehensive employee mental health and wellness support in today's challenging work environment. The email included Jessica's professional headshot, and I remember thinking she looked exactly like what you'd expect from someone in wellness coordination. She had that effortless beauty that comes from genuine fitness, with long auburn hair, pulled back in a sleek ponytail and the kind of warm smile that suggested she genuinely cared about helping people. Her credentials were impressive too. She held a master's degree in organizational psychology from Texas State University and had spent the previous 3 years working as a personal trainer and wellness consultant at FitLife Austin, one of the city's most prestigious fitness centers. According to the announcement, Jessica would be developing comprehensive wellness programs for all Meridian employees, including fitness initiatives, stress management workshops, and mental health resources. She would also be conducting individual wellness assessments for employees who requested them or who were referred by their managers for additional support. The position would report directly to the operations department, which meant she would be working closely with Mark's team to implement these new programs across all 6 floors of our building. I felt genuinely excited about Jessica's arrival. For years, I'd been advocating for better wellness resources at Meridian, especially after watching several talented colleagues leave the company due to burnout and stress-related health issues. Sarah Chen and I had even submitted a formal proposal to HR the previous year, suggesting that investment in employee wellness could significantly improve retention rates and overall productivity. The fact that management had finally decided to create this position felt like validation of concerns we'd been raising for years. Jessica's first day was a Monday in late March, and Mark mentioned over breakfast that he would be giving her the grand tour and helping her get oriented with company policies and procedures. This seemed perfectly reasonable since operations traditionally handled onboarding for new department heads, and Jessica's role would require her to understand how all our various teams functioned. Mark seemed enthusiastic about the company's investment in wellness programming, mentioning that he'd been researching best practices for corporate wellness initiatives and was looking forward to collaborating with someone who had real expertise in the field. Within her first week, Jessica had scheduled meet and greet sessions with every department head, including a 30-minute conversation with me about the marketing team's specific stress points and wellness needs. She came to my office on a Wednesday afternoon, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing a professional but approachable outfit that struck exactly the right tone for someone in her position. Her handshake was firm and confident, and she immediately put me at ease with her genuine interest in understanding our team dynamics. Jessica asked thoughtful questions about our project timelines, deadline pressures, and work-life balance challenges. She wanted to know about the physical workspace setup, whether team members felt they had adequate break time, and what kinds of stress relief activities might be most beneficial for people in creative roles. I found myself opening up about some of the challenges we'd faced during particularly intense campaign launches, and she listened with the kind of focused attention that made me feel heard and understood. She took detailed notes throughout our conversation, occasionally asking follow-up questions that demonstrated she was really processing what I was telling her. When I mentioned that several team members had expressed interest in lunchtime yoga or meditation sessions, her eyes lit up with enthusiasm. She explained that she was certified to teach both and would love to start offering classes in the second-floor wellness space that was being renovated specifically for her programs. By the end of our meeting, I was genuinely impressed with Jessica's professionalism and vision for supporting employee wellness at Meridian. She seemed to understand the unique pressures of working in healthcare technology, where we were constantly balancing creativity with technical accuracy and managing tight deadlines while maintaining high-quality standards. I left our conversation, feeling optimistic about the positive changes she could bring to our workplace culture. Over the following weeks, Jessica threw herself into her new role with remarkable energy and dedication. She conducted individual meetings with dozens of employees, started offering fitness classes in the newly renovated wellness center, and began developing comprehensive wellness programming that addressed everything from nutrition education to stress management techniques. The buzz around the office was overwhelmingly positive, with people genuinely excited about having access to professional wellness support. Mark seemed particularly engaged with Jessica's work, often mentioning during our evening conversations how impressed he was with her systematic approach to program development. He told me about her detailed presentations to the executive team, her research-based recommendations for workplace improvements, and her ability to connect with employees across all departments and hierarchy levels. His enthusiasm felt perfectly appropriate given his operational oversight responsibilities, and I was proud that Meridian had made such a smart hiring decision. Jessica's presence became increasingly visible throughout the building. She had a warm, approachable manner that made people comfortable seeking her guidance, and she seemed to have an intuitive understanding of how to navigate office politics and competing priorities. I frequently saw her in the cafeteria during lunch breaks, chatting with small groups of employees about wellness strategies or upcoming program offerings. Her laugh was distinctive and infectious, and she had a way of making everyone around her feel more relaxed and positive. The Wellness Center renovation was completed in early May, creating a beautiful space with state-of-the-art fitness equipment, a dedicated yoga studio, and a peaceful meditation room with comfortable seating and soft lighting. Jessica had been heavily involved in the design process, working with Mark's operations team to ensure the space would meet the diverse needs of our employee population. The grand opening was scheduled for a Friday afternoon, with refreshments and demonstrations of the various services Jessica would be offering. I attended the Wellness Center opening with several members of my marketing team, and we were all impressed with how thoughtfully the space had been designed. Jessica gave a brief presentation about her vision for supporting employee wellness, emphasizing that her goal was to create a judgment-free environment where people could focus on their physical and mental health without worrying about workplace pressures or expectations. She spoke about the importance of work-life balance and stressed that her door was always open for anyone who needed support or guidance. During the reception, I noticed that Mark seemed particularly attentive to Jessica's presentation, asking several detailed questions about program metrics and employee engagement strategies. Their interaction struck me as professionally appropriate, but notably engaged, with Mark showing the kind of interest in wellness programming that I hadn't seen from him before. When Jessica mentioned her plans for individual wellness assessments, Mark nodded approvingly and commented that he thought such personalized attention could be extremely valuable for employee retention and satisfaction. As spring turned into summer, Jessica's programs gained momentum and popularity throughout the company. Her morning yoga classes were consistently well attended, and she'd started offering walking groups during lunch breaks for employees who wanted to get outside and enjoy Austin's beautiful weather. She also began conducting what she called wellness check-ins with individual employees, comprehensive assessments that addressed everything from physical fitness goals to stress management techniques and work-life balance strategies. Mark mentioned these individual assessments several times during our dinner conversations, praising Jessica's thorough approach and her ability to identify potential issues before they became serious problems. He seemed particularly impressed with her psychological training and her understanding of how workplace dynamics could impact employee mental health. When I asked if he was planning to schedule his own wellness assessment, he said he was considering it but wanted to make sure other employees had priority access to Jessica's time. The first sign that something might be shifting in our household routines came in June, when Mark started staying late at the office more frequently than usual. He explained that he was working closely with Jessica to analyze wellness program, participation rates, and develop strategies for encouraging broader employee engagement. These evening work sessions seemed reasonable given the importance of the wellness initiative and Mark's operational oversight responsibilities. Jessica was still relatively new to the company, and it made sense that she would need additional guidance and support as she refined her programs and processes. Mark's increased work hours coincided with what he described as a particularly complex period for operations management. Meridian had recently signed several large new clients, and Mark's team was responsible for ensuring smooth implementation of our software systems at multiple healthcare facilities simultaneously. The coordination required for these rollouts was genuinely demanding, involving detailed project timelines, technical troubleshooting, and regular communication with client representatives who were dealing with their own operational pressures. I found myself handling more of the evening routine with Emma, but this didn't feel particularly unusual or concerning. Mark had always been dedicated to his work, and I understood that senior-level positions sometimes required irregular hours and additional time commitments. Emma was 16 and increasingly independent, so managing dinner and homework supervision on my own was perfectly manageable. If anything, I appreciated having some quiet one-on-one time with my daughter during these important years before she left for college. Emma seemed to notice Mark's increased absences more than I initially did. During one of our dinner conversations in early July, she mentioned that she missed having both parents home for family meals and asked if Mark's work schedule would return to normal once the new client implementations were completed. I assured her that the increased work demands were temporary and encouraged her to appreciate the additional flexibility she was gaining as she prepared for the independence of college life. Sarah Chen was the first person to make an observation that planted a tiny seed of unease in my mind. We were having lunch at our usual Starbucks on 6th Street, discussing upcoming marketing campaigns and summer vacation plans, when she mentioned seeing Mark and Jessica having what appeared to be an intense conversation in the parking garage the previous evening. Sarah had been leaving late after working on a particularly challenging project proposal, and she'd noticed them standing near Mark's car, engaged in what looked like a serious discussion about work-related matters. Sarah's comment wasn't presented as anything concerning or inappropriate, just a casual observation about seeing colleagues together outside normal business hours. She mentioned that Jessica seemed upset about something and that Mark appeared to be offering reassurance or guidance. The interaction had lasted only a few minutes before they went their separate ways to their respective cars. Sarah noted that it was nice to see management taking such a personal interest in supporting new employees during their adjustment period. I didn't think much about Sarah's observation at the time, but it did make me more aware of the professional relationship developing between Mark and Jessica. Over the following weeks, I began noticing their interactions during company meetings and social events. They seemed to have developed an easy working rapport, with Jessica frequently seeking Mark's input on program development decisions, and Mark showing genuine enthusiasm for her wellness initiatives. Their collaboration appeared to be producing excellent results for the company. Employee participation in wellness programs was higher than anyone had anticipated, and early feedback surveys indicated significant improvements in workplace satisfaction and stress management. Jessica's individual wellness assessments were particularly popular, with employees praising her thorough approach and practical recommendations for improving their overall well-being. The first time I felt a genuine twinge of something that might have been concern came during Meridian's annual summer picnic in late July. The event was held at Zilker Park, with activities and entertainment for employees and their families. Emma had decided to spend the day with friends instead of attending the company picnic, so Mark and I went together, looking forward to a relaxed afternoon with our colleagues outside the office environment. Jessica was responsible for organizing wellness-related activities at the picnic, including a group fitness demonstration and information booths about nutrition and stress management. She looked stunning in her casual summer outfit, moving effortlessly between different activity stations and engaging with employees and their families with genuine warmth and enthusiasm. Her energy was infectious, and she seemed to bring out the best in everyone around her. What struck me as slightly unusual was how frequently Mark checked in with Jessica throughout the afternoon, making sure her activities were running smoothly and offering assistance with logistics and coordination. His attentiveness went beyond what I would have expected from a department supervisor, showing a level of personal investment that felt more intense than his typical management style. When Jessica's sound system experienced technical difficulties during her fitness demonstration, Mark immediately stepped in to help troubleshoot the problem, working alongside her to resolve the issue quickly and efficiently. During the picnic lunch, Mark chose to sit at a table with Jessica and several other employees rather than joining me at the table where I'd settled with Sarah and her son David. This wasn't necessarily inappropriate, since mingling with different groups of colleagues was perfectly normal at company social events. However, I noticed that Mark seemed particularly engaged in the conversation at Jessica's table, laughing frequently and contributing enthusiastically to whatever discussion they were having. When I suggested that Mark and I take a walk around the park together after lunch, he mentioned that he'd promised to help Jessica pack up the wellness activity materials and coordinate the return of borrowed equipment to the company. Again, this was a reasonable explanation, but I found myself feeling slightly excluded from what appeared to be an important collaborative effort between my husband and his newest colleague. The drive home from the picnic was quiet, with Mark seeming preoccupied and somewhat distant. When I asked about his conversation with Jessica's table during lunch, he provided vague responses about wellness program planning and upcoming initiatives. He seemed tired and mentioned that the combination of his regular operational responsibilities and his oversight of the wellness program was requiring more energy and attention than he'd initially anticipated. That evening, Mark spent several hours in his home office, claiming he needed to review materials that Jessica had prepared for an upcoming presentation to the executive team. He explained that her work was innovative and comprehensive, but required careful review to ensure it aligned with company policies and operational capabilities. His dedication to supporting Jessica's success struck me as admirable, though I did wonder if he was investing more time in wellness program oversight than was strictly necessary given his other responsibilities. August brought the first real sign that something fundamental might be shifting in Mark's priorities and attention. Emma was preparing for her junior year of high school, and we'd planned a family weekend trip to visit several colleges in Houston and Dallas. This annual college exploration trip had been a tradition for our family, allowing Emma to get a feel for different campus environments while giving Mark and me quality time together away from work pressures. 2 days before our planned departure, Mark announced that he needed to cancel the trip due to urgent work demands related to the wellness program implementation. Jessica had identified some potential issues with employee engagement metrics that required immediate analysis and strategic planning. Mark explained that the timing was critical because the executive team was scheduled to review wellness program effectiveness the following week, and any problems needed to be addressed before that presentation. Emma was understandably disappointed about the canceled trip, and I found myself feeling frustrated with the timing and Mark's apparent inability to delegate these responsibilities to other members of his operations team. When I suggested that the wellness program analysis could wait until after our family weekend, Mark became defensive, explaining that I didn't understand the complexity of the issues Jessica had identified or the importance of addressing them promptly. The intensity of Mark's response surprised me, as he rarely showed such strong emotion about work-related decisions. His explanation about the urgency of the wellness program review seemed somewhat disproportionate to what I understood about typical corporate planning timelines. However, I recognized that I might not have complete information about the pressures he was facing from upper management or the specific challenges Jessica had discovered in her program analysis. We rescheduled the college visit trip for September, and Mark spent the weekend working with Jessica on what he described as comprehensive program evaluation and strategic planning. He left the house early Saturday morning, explaining that they were meeting at the office to review data and develop recommendations for improving employee engagement with wellness initiatives. When he returned home Saturday evening, he seemed energized and enthusiastic about the progress they'd made, mentioning Jessica's innovative ideas and her impressive analytical skills. Sunday morning, Mark received several text messages that he said were from Jessica, sharing additional insights about wellness program improvements that had occurred to her overnight. He spent much of Sunday afternoon responding to these messages and refining what he described as important recommendations for the executive presentation. His focus and dedication to this project seemed unusually intense, but I attributed it to his natural perfectionism and his desire to ensure that Meridian's investment in wellness programming would be successful. The executive presentation took place on a Tuesday in early September, and Mark was notably nervous beforehand, spending extra time on his appearance and reviewing his notes multiple times. He mentioned that Jessica would be co-presenting with him, sharing responsibility for explaining the program's current status and future recommendations. This collaborative approach seemed appropriate given Jessica's expertise and her role as the primary program developer. After the presentation, Mark seemed relieved and satisfied with how it had been received. He mentioned that the executive team had been impressed with Jessica's thoroughness and innovation, and that several of her recommendations had been approved for immediate implementation. His pride in Jessica's success was evident, and he spoke about her with the kind of enthusiasm typically reserved for discussing significant professional achievements or particularly talented colleagues. That evening, Mark suggested that we celebrate the successful presentation by going out for dinner at the Driscoll Grill, one of Austin's most elegant restaurants. This was an unusual gesture, as we typically reserved such expensive dining experiences for special occasions like anniversaries or major promotions. When I asked what specifically we were celebrating, Mark explained that the wellness program's success reflected well on his operational oversight abilities and could potentially lead to expanded responsibilities within the company. During dinner, Mark seemed more relaxed and talkative than he'd been in weeks, sharing details about Jessica's presentation style and the positive feedback she'd received from the executive team. He mentioned her ability to communicate complex psychological concepts in accessible terms and her skill at developing practical recommendations that could be implemented within existing operational frameworks. His admiration for her professional capabilities was clear, and I found myself feeling proud that Meridian had made such an excellent hiring decision. However, as Mark continued discussing Jessica's various strengths and achievements throughout our dinner conversation, I began to notice that his enthusiasm seemed to extend beyond typical professional appreciation. He spoke about her with a level of personal investment and emotional engagement that felt somehow different from his usual discussions about work colleagues. When I mentioned this observation, Mark dismissed it as natural excitement about a successful project outcome and his satisfaction with having played a role in supporting Jessica's professional development. The seeds of doubt that had been planted during these summer months remained small and manageable, easily explained by reasonable, professional circumstances and Mark's genuine commitment to his work responsibilities. I had no concrete reason to question his explanations or to suspect that his increased collaboration with Jessica represented anything beyond appropriate workplace partnership. My trust in Mark's integrity and our marriage's stability remained fundamentally intact, even as subtle changes in his behavior and priorities began creating tiny fissures in the foundation of our shared life. September marked the beginning of what I would later recognize as my investigation phase, though at the time I simply thought of it as paying closer attention to details that had been nagging at my subconscious for weeks. The trigger came on a Thursday afternoon when Emma mentioned during our drive home from her debate team practice that she'd tried calling Mark's office around 4 o'clock to ask about weekend plans, but his assistant had told her he'd left early for a wellness program meeting. This struck me as odd because Mark had texted me at 4:30, saying he was stuck in back-to-back operational meetings and wouldn't be home until after 7. When he finally arrived that evening, looking slightly windblown and carrying a coffee cup from a shop I didn't recognize, I casually asked about his day. He launched into a detailed description of client implementation challenges and budget reviews that had supposedly kept him occupied until just before he'd headed home. The discrepancy bothered me more than it probably should have, but I found myself mentally cataloging similar small inconsistencies over the following days. Mark's explanations for his schedule had become increasingly elaborate, filled with specific details about meetings and deadlines that seemed designed to discourage follow-up questions. His enthusiasm for wellness program developments continued to dominate our dinner conversations, with Jessica's name appearing in nearly every work-related story he shared. I decided to pay more attention to the observable facts rather than relying solely on Mark's explanations. This wasn't because I suspected anything dramatic, but because some instinct was telling me that understanding the full picture of his work responsibilities might help me be more supportive during what appeared to be a particularly demanding period in his career. My first real discovery came accidentally the following Monday when I was reviewing our joint credit card statement for expense tracking purposes. Among the usual charges for gas, groceries, and Emma's school activities, I noticed several unfamiliar restaurant transactions from the previous month. The amounts weren't large, but they were at establishments I'd never heard Mark mention, including a wine bar called Vintage 505 that appeared twice in the same week. When I asked Mark about these charges during breakfast Tuesday morning, he paused for just a moment too long before explaining that they were client meeting expenses that he'd forgotten to submit for reimbursement. He mentioned that Jessica had suggested these particular venues as appropriate for informal discussions with potential wellness program partners, places where conversations could remain confidential while maintaining a professional atmosphere. His explanation was plausible, but something about his delivery felt rehearsed. Mark had always been meticulous about submitting business expenses promptly, often completing his monthly reports within days of incurring any costs. The idea that he would forget to document multiple client meeting expenses seemed inconsistent with his usual attention to financial details. That afternoon, I found myself walking past Jessica's office during my lunch break, something I'd never done before without a specific reason to visit the wellness center. Through her glass door, I could see her sitting at her desk, speaking, animatedly on the phone while gesturing with her free hand. She looked professional and engaged, exactly as I would expect from someone dedicated to her work responsibilities. As I continued toward the cafeteria, I encountered Mark coming out of the elevator bank, checking his phone with an expression of mild concern. When he looked up and saw me, his face lit up with what seemed like genuine pleasure. And he gave me a quick kiss on the cheek before mentioning that he was heading to a meeting with Jessica about employee feedback analysis. His demeanor was warm and natural, showing no signs of discomfort or secretiveness about his professional obligations. Over the next several days, I began paying closer attention to the timing and frequency of Mark's text messages throughout the workday. This felt slightly uncomfortable, like I was crossing some invisible boundary of trust and privacy, but I justified it as simply wanting to better understand the demands he was facing so I could be more supportive at home. What I noticed was that Mark's texting patterns had changed significantly over the past few months. Previously, we'd exchanged brief messages throughout the day about practical matters like dinner plans, Emma's activities, or household logistics. Recently, his messages had become less frequent and more generic, often arriving in clusters rather than as natural responses to ongoing conversations. More tellingly, I observed that Mark would sometimes become absorbed in lengthy text exchanges. While we were together at home, his attention focused intently on his phone screen while he typed responses that seemed to require careful consideration. When I asked about these conversations, he consistently explained that they were work-related discussions with various team members about operational issues or client concerns. My growing curiosity led me to suggest that Mark and I have lunch together on Wednesday, something we hadn't done in several weeks due to our busy schedules. He seemed genuinely pleased by the invitation and suggested we meet at the Austin Food Hall, a casual spot that offered multiple dining options and comfortable seating for extended conversations. During lunch, I asked Mark more detailed questions about the wellness program's current status and Jessica's recent initiatives. His responses were knowledgeable and enthusiastic, demonstrating clear familiarity with program metrics, employee feedback, and future planning goals. However, I noticed that his knowledge seemed to extend beyond what I would expect from typical departmental oversight, encompassing details about individual employee assessments and specific therapeutic approaches that Jessica was implementing. When I commented that he seemed remarkably well-informed about wellness program specifics, Mark explained that effective operational oversight required deep understanding of all departmental activities. He mentioned that Jessica had been providing him with comprehensive reports and regular briefings to ensure that wellness initiatives remained aligned with broader company objectives and operational constraints. His explanation was logical, but I found myself wondering why other department heads didn't receive the same level of detailed attention from Mark's operational oversight. The marketing department, for example, operated with relative independence, receiving support from operations primarily during major campaign launches or when technical integration was required. Jessica's wellness program seemed to be receiving an unusually high level of ongoing managerial involvement. That evening, I decided to check our home computer's browsing history, telling myself I was simply curious about Mark's research interests related to his expanded wellness program responsibilities. What I found was a substantial collection of searches related to workplace psychology, employee mental health assessment techniques, and organizational wellness best practices. The research appeared to be thorough and recent, with many articles bookmarked for future reference. While this research aligned with Mark's stated interest in supporting Jessica's professional development, the depth and specificity of his investigation into psychological assessment methods seemed to go well beyond what would be necessary for basic operational oversight. Some of the bookmarked articles focused on topics like recognizing signs of employee mental instability and developing intervention strategies for problematic workplace behaviors. I also discovered that Mark had been researching restaurants and entertainment venues throughout Austin, with particular attention to places that offered private dining areas or intimate atmospheres suitable for confidential business discussions. His search history included several wine bars, upscale coffee shops, and restaurants that specialized in quiet, sophisticated environments where sensitive conversations could take place without interruption. Friday afternoon brought an opportunity to observe Mark and Jessica's professional interaction directly when I attended a company-wide presentation about Meridian's quarterly achievements and future goals. The presentation was held in our largest conference room, with department heads providing brief updates about their team's contributions to overall company success. Jessica's segment focused on wellness program participation rates and preliminary data about employee satisfaction improvements. Her presentation was polished and compelling, demonstrating clear communication skills and impressive analytical capabilities. She spoke confidently about program outcomes while acknowledging areas where further development was needed. What caught my attention was how frequently Jessica's eyes sought out Mark during her presentation, as if looking for approval or encouragement from him specifically. Mark, in turn, watched her with an intensity that seemed to exceed normal supervisory interest, nodding approvingly at her key points and maintaining focused eye contact throughout her entire segment. After Jessica finished her presentation, Mark stood up to provide operational context for her wellness program achievements, explaining how these initiatives fit into broader company strategic objectives. His comments were clearly intended to support and amplify Jessica's work, positioning her successes as examples of effective operational planning and execution. The interaction between them during the question and answer session that followed was particularly revealing. When an employee asked about potential expansion of wellness services, Jessica and Mark exchanged a meaningful look before Mark deferred to Jessica's expertise, while simultaneously indicating his strong support for whatever recommendations she might propose. Their nonverbal communication suggested a level of coordination and mutual understanding that seemed to extend beyond typical professional collaboration. After the presentation, I lingered in the conference room while other employees filed out, hoping to observe more casual interactions between Mark and Jessica. What I saw was a brief conversation where Jessica appeared to be thanking Mark for his supportive comments, and Mark responded with what looked like genuine warmth and personal investment in her professional success. That weekend, Mark announced that he needed to spend several hours on Saturday working with Jessica to prepare for an important wellness program evaluation that was scheduled for the following week. He explained that this assessment would determine whether Meridian would expand wellness services or modify the current program structure, making thorough preparation essential for ensuring positive outcomes. I suggested that such intensive weekend work seemed unusual for a program that had been receiving positive feedback and strong employee participation. Mark's response was more defensive than I'd expected, with him explaining that I didn't understand the complexity of corporate wellness programming or the scrutiny that new initiatives faced from executive leadership. His tone implied that my questions reflected a lack of appreciation for the professional challenges he was navigating. Saturday morning, Mark left the house at 9 o'clock, dressed more casually than usual but still looking polished and put together. He mentioned that he and Jessica planned to work in the office initially, but might move to a quieter location if they needed to focus on detailed analysis without typical workplace distractions. Emma noticed Mark's departure and asked if she could invite friends over for a study group, since both parents wouldn't be home to supervise their activities. This comment made me realize that Mark's weekend work commitments had become frequent enough that Emma was beginning to plan around his absences, treating them as predictable rather than exceptional circumstances. Around 2 o'clock that afternoon, I received a text from Mark saying that he and Jessica had decided to continue their work at a coffee shop near the office, where they could spread out materials and discuss program details without worrying about being overheard by other employees. The message included a photo of what appeared to be wellness program documents scattered across a cafe table, presumably intended to demonstrate the legitimate work focus of their meeting. However, something about the photo struck me as oddly composed, as if it had been arranged specifically to document their professional activity, rather than captured naturally during their work session. The papers were positioned in a way that made their work-related content clearly visible, and the coffee cups in the frame appeared to be full, rather than showing signs of being consumed during an extended work session. I found myself wondering why Mark felt the need to provide photographic evidence of his work activities, something he'd never done before during our 12 years of marriage. His previous weekend work commitments had been mentioned in passing without any apparent need to document or justify how his time was being spent. That evening, Mark returned home around 6 o'clock, appearing energized and satisfied with the progress he and Jessica had made on their program evaluation preparation. He spoke enthusiastically about Jessica's innovative approaches to employee assessment and her ability to identify potential problems before they became serious workplace issues. When I asked about specific details of their analysis, Mark provided general responses about program metrics and employee feedback trends without sharing the concrete information I would have expected from such an intensive work session. His descriptions of their accomplishments were positive but vague, lacking the specific insights and data points that typically characterized his discussions about professional projects. Sunday brought another lengthy text exchange between Mark and Jessica, with Mark explaining that they were refining their evaluation materials and coordinating their presentation strategy for the upcoming leadership review. The frequency and duration of these text conversations was beginning to feel excessive for what should have been straightforward professional communication between a department head and his direct report. By Sunday evening, I had begun to feel genuinely concerned about the amount of time and emotional energy Mark was investing in Jessica's professional success. While his commitment to effective operational oversight was admirable, his level of personal involvement in wellness program development seemed to exceed reasonable managerial boundaries. When I mentioned this observation to Mark, suggesting that he might be taking on responsibilities that should primarily belong to Jessica as the program coordinator, his reaction was immediate and surprisingly intense. He accused me of not understanding the complexity of his job or the importance of ensuring that new company initiatives received adequate support during their implementation phases. Mark's defensive response was unlike his usual calm, logical approach to discussing work-related challenges. His emotional investment in defending his collaboration with Jessica felt disproportionate to what should have been a straightforward conversation about work-life balance and appropriate professional boundaries. That night, as I lay in bed listening to Mark's steady breathing beside me, I found myself acknowledging that my gut instincts were telling me something important about the changes in his behavior and priorities. The rational part of my mind could explain away each individual incident or observation, but the cumulative pattern was beginning to suggest that something fundamental had shifted in Mark's professional relationships and personal commitments. I wasn't ready to articulate specific suspicions or accusations, but I was no longer able to dismiss my growing sense that Mark's collaboration with Jessica involved dynamics that extended beyond typical workplace partnerships. The intensity of his investment in her success, combined with the increasing frequency of their interactions, and the defensive way he responded to questions about their work together suggested that I needed to pay more serious attention to what was actually happening rather than simply accepting his explanations at face value. Tuesday morning brought the wellness program evaluation meeting that Mark and Jessica had spent so much time preparing for over the weekend. Mark seemed unusually nervous beforehand, checking his appearance multiple times and reviewing his notes with an intensity that seemed excessive for what should have been a routine program review. The meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the executive conference room, with attendance limited to department heads and senior management. As the marketing manager, I wasn't included in this particular evaluation, but I found myself curious about how Jessica's presentation would be received and whether Mark's extensive preparation efforts would translate into positive outcomes. Around 11:30, I received a brief text from Mark saying that the meeting was going well and that Jessica's presentation had been very positively received by the executive team. His message conveyed genuine excitement about the program's apparent success and his satisfaction with having played a supportive role in Jessica's professional achievement. Later that afternoon, Sarah Chen mentioned that she'd heard through the office grapevine that Jessica's wellness program had received significant praise from leadership and that additional funding had been approved for program expansion. The news seemed to validate Mark's investment of time and energy in supporting Jessica's work, providing concrete evidence that his managerial oversight had contributed to a successful outcome. However, when Mark came home that evening, his mood was more subdued than I would have expected given the positive reception of Jessica's presentation. When I congratulated him on the program's success and asked about specific feedback from the executive team, his responses lacked the enthusiasm and detailed analysis that typically characterized his discussions about professional victories. Instead, Mark seemed preoccupied and somewhat distant, as if his thoughts were focused on something other than celebrating the successful outcome of weeks of intensive preparation. When I asked if everything was all right, he assured me that he was simply tired from the stress of the evaluation process and needed some time to decompress from the intensity of recent work demands. That night, Mark received several text messages that caused him to smile in ways I hadn't seen in months, his face lighting up with genuine pleasure as he read and responded to what he described as congratulatory messages from colleagues about the wellness program's success. His happiness seemed more personal and emotionally engaged than typical professional satisfaction, as if these messages represented something more meaningful than routine workplace recognition. I found myself wondering who was sending messages that could generate such obvious joy and emotional response from my husband, and why professional congratulations would create the kind of personal happiness that seemed to radiate from Mark as he composed his replies. The intensity of his positive reaction suggested that these exchanges represented something more significant than typical colleague-to-colleague communication about shared professional achievements. The moment I had been unconsciously preparing for arrived on a Wednesday morning in early October, when I discovered the email that shattered every remaining illusion about my marriage. I had been using Mark's laptop to review some marketing materials for a client presentation when a notification chimed, and Jessica's name appeared in the preview window with a message that began, "Last night was perfect, darling. I can't wait until we don't have to hide anymore." My hands trembled as I opened the full email thread, revealing months of intimate correspondence that documented not just an affair, but a complete emotional and physical relationship that had been developing parallel to my marriage. The messages revealed plans for weekend getaways during Mark's supposed client meetings, detailed discussions about their future together, and Jessica's growing impatience with maintaining secrecy about their relationship. More devastating than the romantic content was the professional manipulation that had been orchestrated through their affair. Jessica's emails revealed that she had been conducting targeted wellness assessments on employees that Mark wanted to marginalize or remove from the company. The mental health evaluations she had been praised for were actually character assassinations designed to damage specific individuals' professional reputations and career prospects. The most chilling discovery was an email thread from the previous week where Jessica and Mark discussed their strategy for having me declared mentally unfit for my current responsibilities. Jessica had been documenting what she described as my increasingly erratic behavior and signs of workplace stress that could indicate deeper psychological instability. They had been planning to use her position as wellness coordinator to recommend that I be placed on administrative leave for mental health reasons. Reading these emails felt like watching my entire reality collapse in real time. Every interaction I'd had with Jessica over the past 6 months took on sinister new meaning. Her friendly conversations with me hadn't been genuine professional interest, but intelligence gathering designed to identify vulnerabilities that could be exploited to destroy my career and reputation. Her wellness assessments weren't therapeutic tools, but weapons being used to eliminate perceived threats to her relationship with Mark. The emails revealed that Jessica saw me as the primary obstacle to her future with Mark, and that she had been systematically working to create justification for removing me from both the workplace and the marriage. Her plan involved establishing a documented pattern of mental instability that would support recommendations for psychological evaluation and potential termination from my position at Meridian Healthcare Solutions. Mark's participation in this scheme was even more devastating than Jessica's manipulation. His messages showed enthusiastic support for using Jessica's professional authority to undermine my career, with detailed suggestions about how to document incidents that could be interpreted as evidence of declining mental health. The man I had loved and trusted for 12 years had been actively plotting to destroy my professional reputation and financial security to clear the path for his new relationship. The timeline revealed in their correspondence showed that their affair had begun almost immediately after Jessica's hiring, with their first intimate encounter occurring during one of those supposed late-night work sessions in May. Every explanation Mark had given me about his increased collaboration with Jessica had been a lie designed to create opportunities for their relationship while keeping me unaware of what was actually happening. Their messages also revealed the extent to which they had been laughing at my trusting nature, with Jessica referring to me as completely clueless, and Mark describing how easy it was to manipulate my supportive personality to cover for their activities. They had turned my genuine care for Mark's professional success into a tool for deceiving me about the true nature of their relationship. As I continued reading through months of correspondence, I realized that they had been planning this psychological warfare campaign for weeks, waiting for the right moment to implement their strategy for having me removed from the workplace. Jessica's upcoming presentation about identifying mentally unfit employees wasn't a general wellness initiative, but the culmination of their plan to target me specifically. The betrayal was so complete and calculated that I initially felt paralyzed by the magnitude of what I had discovered. This wasn't a simple affair that had developed unexpectedly, but a deliberate conspiracy to destroy my life and livelihood while positioning Jessica to take my place in both Mark's personal and professional world. However, as the initial shock began to wear off, I felt something else emerging alongside the pain and devastation. For the first time in months, I had clarity about what was actually happening and concrete evidence of the manipulation I had been experiencing. The gaslighting and subtle undermining that had made me question my own perceptions suddenly made perfect sense, and I realized that my instincts had been correct all along. I printed copies of the most damaging email exchanges and saved additional evidence to a secure cloud account that Mark wouldn't be able to access or delete. If Jessica and Mark wanted to play psychological warfare, they were about to discover that I wasn't the helpless victim they had assumed me to be. The rest of that day passed in a strange state of suspended reality as I went through the motions of normal work and family activities while processing the full implications of what I had learned. Mark came home that evening acting perfectly normal, asking about my day and sharing casual conversation about Emma's school activities, completely unaware that his carefully constructed deception had been exposed. Watching him maintain his facade of caring husband and devoted father while knowing about his active participation in Jessica's scheme to destroy my career created a surreal cognitive dissonance. Every gesture of affection felt like another layer of manipulation. Every concerned question about my well-being seemed like intelligence gathering for their ongoing psychological assessment of my mental state. That night, as Mark slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake planning my response to their conspiracy. Jessica's presentation about identifying mentally unfit employees was scheduled for the following Friday, and I realized that this would be the perfect opportunity to turn their own weapon against them. If they wanted to make mental health and workplace fitness a public discussion, I would be happy to provide the office with some very relevant information about professional ethics and conflict of interest violations. Thursday morning brought a surge of determined energy as I began implementing my plan for exposing Jessica and Mark's conspiracy during her own presentation. I had spent the previous evening preparing a comprehensive dossier of evidence that would demonstrate not only their affair, but the professional misconduct they had been engaging in through Jessica's abuse of her wellness coordinator position. The irony of using Jessica's own presentation as the platform for revealing her ethical violations felt like perfect poetic justice. She had planned to use her position of authority to publicly undermine my mental health and professional credibility, so I would use that same forum to expose the corrupt motivations behind her supposed wellness initiatives. I arrived at work early Thursday morning and spent several hours preparing materials that would support my presentation. The evidence I had gathered painted a clear picture of systematic abuse of Jessica's professional authority, violations of employee privacy, and conflicts of interest that had compromised the integrity of the entire wellness program. Sarah Chen noticed my focused energy and asked if everything was all right. I assured her that I was working on something important that would be revealed soon, and that I appreciated her friendship and support more than she could know. Her genuine concern and loyalty reminded me that there were people at Meridian who valued honesty and integrity, and that exposing Jessica and Mark's corruption would ultimately benefit the entire company. Throughout Thursday, I observed Mark and Jessica's interactions with new eyes, seeing the subtle signs of their intimate relationship that I had previously dismissed or explained away. The brief touches during conversations, the meaningful glances across meeting rooms, and the way they seemed to communicate through unspoken signals all took on obvious significance now that I understood the true nature of their connection. Jessica's behavior toward me had also become more subtly aggressive over the past week, with small comments and suggestions that seemed designed to plant seeds of doubt about my mental stability and professional competence. Her wellness coordinator facade was slipping as she prepared to implement the final phase of her plan to have me declared unfit for my position. Friday morning arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp and clear with brilliant blue skies that seemed to promise a day of revelation and resolution. Jessica's presentation was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the Harmony conference room, with attendance expected from all department heads and most senior staff members. The timing couldn't have been more perfect for maximum impact and witnesses. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a professional but confident outfit that would project authority and competence during what I knew would be the most important presentation of my career. Emma noticed my extra attention to appearance and commented that I seemed different somehow, more focused and determined than she'd seen me in months. Mark left for work at his usual time, mentioning that he was looking forward to Jessica's presentation and expected it to be a significant milestone for the wellness program's future development. His anticipation was genuine, as he believed they were about to successfully implement their scheme to remove me from the workplace and clear the path for their relationship to become public. The morning passed slowly as I made final preparations for my counterattack against Jessica's presentation. I had prepared a brief but devastating response that would use her own professional standards and ethical guidelines to expose the corruption behind her wellness assessments and recommendations. At 1:30, I made my way to the Harmony conference room, arriving early to ensure I would have a good position for addressing the audience when the appropriate moment came. Other employees were filing in with expressions of curiosity and mild interest, expecting to hear about routine wellness program updates and perhaps some new initiatives for supporting employee mental health. Jessica entered the room at exactly 2 o'clock, looking polished and confident as she prepared to deliver what she believed would be her triumph over me. She was dressed in a sharp business suit that projected authority and expertise, and she carried herself with the demeanor of someone who felt completely in control of the situation. Mark took his seat in the front row, where he could provide visible support for Jessica's presentation, while documenting my reactions to her recommendations about mentally unfit employees. They had planned this moment carefully, expecting to catch me off guard and create a public scene that would support their narrative about my declining mental stability. Jessica began her presentation with general information about workplace mental health and the importance of identifying employees who might be struggling with psychological issues that could impact their job performance. Her tone was professional and concerned, establishing herself as a caring advocate for employee well-being who had discovered some troubling patterns that required immediate attention. As she moved into more specific territory about assessment, methods and warning signs of mental instability, I could see her building toward the moment when she would recommend specific interventions for employees who had been identified as potentially problematic. The anticipation in her voice was barely concealed as she approached the climactic revelation of her carefully orchestrated character assassination. Then she reached the slide that contained her recommendations for immediate action regarding employees who posed potential risks to workplace safety and productivity. My name appeared on her list of individuals requiring mandatory psychological evaluation and possible administrative leave, accompanied by detailed documentation of supposed behavioral indicators that suggested declining mental health. The room fell silent as employees processed what they were seeing and hearing. Jessica's presentation had taken an unexpected turn from general wellness discussion to specific personnel recommendations that seemed to come out of nowhere. Several people looked confused about why employee names were being displayed publicly during what they had expected to be an educational presentation about mental health resources. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I raised my hand and asked to address the room about Jessica's assessment methods and the evidence she had used to develop her recommendations. Jessica's confident expression flickered for just a moment before she agreed to take questions about her professional evaluation process. I stood up and walked to the front of the room, carrying the folder that contained months of printed email correspondence between Jessica and Mark. The silence ensued. The room was complete as I began speaking, my voice calm and clear despite the magnitude of what I was about to reveal. I started by thanking everyone for their attention and acknowledging Jessica's presentation about the importance of mental health in the workplace. Then I explained that I had some additional information about Jessica's assessment methods that I thought the group should consider before accepting her recommendations about specific employees. I opened my folder and began reading selected excerpts from Jessica and Mark's email correspondence, starting with messages that documented their affair and moving on to their discussions about using her position to target specific employees for removal. The room remained absolutely silent as the true scope of their conspiracy became clear to everyone present. Jessica's face went white as I continued reading evidence of their plan to have me declared mentally unfit, including detailed strategies for documenting incidents that could be interpreted as psychological instability. Mark looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair as their months of careful deception collapsed in front of his colleagues and subordinates. I concluded my presentation by noting that Jessica's wellness assessments had been compromised by personal conflicts of interest and that her recommendations about employee mental fitness should be disregarded pending a thorough investigation of her professional conduct. I suggested that the company might want to consider whether someone who had abused their position to target personal enemies was qualified to make judgments about other employees' psychological fitness. The aftermath of my revelation was swift and decisive. Tom Rodriguez from Human Resources immediately called for a suspension of the meeting pending investigation of the allegations I had presented. Jessica was escorted from the room by security while Mark sat in stunned silence, apparently unable to process how completely their scheme had backfired. Within hours, both Jessica and Mark had been suspended pending formal investigation of ethics, violations, and abuse of authority. The email evidence I had provided was more than sufficient to demonstrate systematic misconduct that had compromised the integrity of the wellness program and violated numerous company policies about conflicts of interest and employee privacy. By the following Monday, Jessica's employment at Meridian Healthcare Solutions had been terminated, and Mark had been demoted to a non-supervisory position with significantly reduced responsibilities and authority. The company also launched a comprehensive review of all wellness assessments Jessica had conducted to determine whether other employees had been targeted for personal rather than professional reasons. The dissolution of my marriage proceeded with equal efficiency. Mark's participation in Jessica's scheme to destroy my career had eliminated any possibility of reconciliation or trust rebuilding. I filed for divorce immediately, citing irreconcilable differences and seeking an equitable division of assets that would provide financial security for Emma and myself. Emma's reaction to learning about her father's betrayal was initially shock and disappointment, but she quickly rallied to support my decision to end the marriage and expose the conspiracy against my career. Her maturity and understanding during this difficult period reminded me that I had raised a strong, principled young woman who could distinguish between right and wrong, even when the situation involved her own family. The legal proceedings moved quickly, with Mark offering little resistance to my divorce terms. His public humiliation at Meridian and the loss of his professional reputation had left him with limited leverage for negotiating favorable settlement conditions. Within 6 months, our divorce was finalized, and I had secured both financial independence and full custody of Emma. My career at Meridian actually strengthened following the exposure of Jessica and Mark's conspiracy. The executive team recognized that I had demonstrated exceptional integrity and courage in revealing corruption that could have seriously damaged the company's reputation and employee morale. I was promoted to senior marketing director with expanded responsibilities and a significant salary increase. The wellness program was completely restructured under new leadership that emphasized transparency, ethical conduct, and genuine employee support rather than personal agenda advancement. My experience became a case study in recognizing and responding to workplace manipulation, helping to establish new protocols for preventing similar abuses of authority in the future. Emma thrived during our transition to single-parent household dynamics, taking pride in her mother's strength and resilience while developing her own sense of independence and self-reliance. We grew closer through the experience of rebuilding our lives together, creating new traditions and routines that reflected our values and priorities rather than trying to maintain appearances for someone else's benefit. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I learned that Jessica had been unable to find employment in the wellness or corporate psychology field due to the professional references from her termination at Meridian. Her scheme to advance her career by destroying mine had ultimately destroyed her own professional prospects, while leaving me stronger and more successful than before. Mark attempted to reach out several times during the first year after our divorce, apparently hoping to rebuild some kind of relationship, or at least reduce the animosity between us. However, his betrayal had been so complete and calculated that forgiveness seemed both impossible and unnecessary. I had moved beyond anger into indifference, focusing my energy on building a future rather than relitigating the past. The experience taught me invaluable lessons about trusting my instincts, recognizing manipulation, and understanding that sometimes the people closest to us are capable of far greater deception than we ever imagined possible. It also demonstrated that strength and intelligence can overcome even carefully planned betrayal when we refuse to accept gaslighting and manipulation as normal relationship dynamics. Today, Emma is thriving in her senior year of high school, preparing for college, with confidence and excitement about her future. She often tells me how proud she is of the way I handled the crisis with her father and Jessica, and how my example taught her to value integrity and courage over security and convenience. My career continues to flourish at Meridian, where I've become known as someone who combines creative marketing expertise with strong ethical leadership and the ability to navigate complex professional challenges. The experience of exposing corruption and rebuilding my life has given me a reputation for resilience and reliability that has opened doors to opportunities I never could have imagined during my marriage. Looking back on that devastating Wednesday morning when I discovered Jessica and Mark's conspiracy, I realized that it was actually the beginning of my liberation from a relationship that had been slowly diminishing my sense of self-worth and personal agency. Their betrayal forced me to reclaim my strength and independence, ultimately leading to a life that is more authentic, fulfilling, and aligned with my values than anything I had experienced during 12 years of marriage. The wellness coordinator, who thought she could destroy my mental health and professional reputation, inadvertently gave me the greatest gift possible: the motivation and opportunity to discover just how strong and capable I really am when I stop trying to accommodate other people's deception and manipulation. Sometimes the worst betrayal can become the catalyst for the best transformation if we have the courage to turn our pain into power and our victimization into victory. The moment that would define the rest of my life arrived on an ordinary Wednesday morning when I accidentally discovered the digital trail that exposed everything. I had been using Mark's laptop to access some marketing files for a client presentation when an email notification appeared from Jessica Walsh with a subject line that made my blood run cold: tonight's strategy session and our timeline for Lisa's assessment. Opening that email felt like stepping off a cliff into an abyss I hadn't known existed. The message contained detailed plans for what Jessica euphemistically called my mental fitness evaluation, but which was actually an elaborate scheme to have me declared psychologically unfit for my position at Meridian Healthcare Solutions. Worse yet, Mark wasn't just aware of this plan. He was actively collaborating in its development, providing Jessica with intimate details about my personality, habits, and potential vulnerabilities that could be weaponized against me. The email thread revealed months of correspondence documenting not only their romantic relationship, but a calculated conspiracy to destroy my career and reputation. Jessica had been systematically gathering information about my behavior, mood patterns, and professional interactions, documenting everything in what she described as a comprehensive psychological profile that would support her recommendation for my removal from the company. Reading through their exchanges was like watching my entire reality disintegrate in real time. Every interaction I'd had with Jessica over the past 6 months suddenly took on sinister new meaning. Her friendly conversations hadn't been genuine professional interest, but intelligence gathering designed to identify weaknesses that could be exploited. Her concern for my well-being during stressful periods hadn't been therapeutic support, but documentation of incidents that could be reframed as evidence of mental instability. The most devastating discovery was learning how they had been manipulating situations to create documentation of my supposed psychological decline. Jessica had been deliberately scheduling wellness check-ins during times when I was dealing with work stress, then recording my responses in ways that suggested emotional volatility and poor judgment. Mark had been providing her with information about my menstrual cycle, sleep patterns, and family concerns, allowing her to time these assessments for maximum psychological impact. Their correspondence revealed a timeline for implementing what they called Phase 3 of their plan, which involved Jessica presenting her mental fitness assessment findings to the executive team with recommendations for my immediate placement on administrative leave pending psychological evaluation. The presentation was scheduled for the following Friday, just 9 days away, during a company-wide meeting about workplace wellness initiatives. The cruelty and calculation behind their scheme was breathtaking. They had been planning not just to end my marriage, but to destroy my professional reputation and financial security in ways that would make it virtually impossible for me to rebuild my career in the healthcare technology industry. Jessica's position as wellness coordinator gave her recommendations significant weight with management, especially since she had established herself as a caring advocate for employee mental health. But perhaps the most painful aspect of their conspiracy was discovering how much they had been enjoying my unknowing participation in my own destruction. Their messages contained cruel jokes about my trusting nature, my dedication to supporting Mark's career, and my genuine belief that Jessica was trying to help improve workplace culture at Meridian. They had turned my strengths into weapons against me, using my loyalty and integrity as tools for their deception. As I continued reading through months of their correspondence, I realized that their affair had begun almost immediately after Jessica's hiring, with their first intimate encounter occurring during one of those supposed late-night planning sessions in May. Every explanation Mark had given me about his increased collaboration with Jessica had been carefully constructed lies designed to create opportunities for their relationship while keeping me completely unaware of what was happening. The timeline revealed in their emails showed escalating intimacy alongside increasingly detailed planning for my professional destruction. Jessica's initial focus had been on establishing herself in her new position and developing her relationship with Mark. But by July, she had begun actively working to eliminate what she saw as the primary obstacle to their future together: my presence in both the workplace and Mark's life. Their messages also revealed the extent to which they had been researching legal and professional precedents for removing employees based on mental health concerns. Jessica had been consulting with former colleagues in the psychology field, gathering information about assessment techniques and documentation requirements that would make their recommendations as bulletproof as possible against potential legal challenges. Mark's participation in this research was particularly devastating because it demonstrated his willingness to actively participate in destroying my livelihood and reputation. His messages showed enthusiasm for Jessica's plan and detailed suggestions about how to document incidents that could be interpreted as evidence of declining mental health. The man I had loved and trusted for 12 years had been plotting to ruin my life, with the same methodical attention to detail he applied to his operational responsibilities at work. The emotional impact of these discoveries was overwhelming, but alongside the pain and betrayal, I felt something else emerging: a crystalline clarity about what I needed to do. For months, I had been questioning my own perceptions and wondering if I was imagining problems that didn't really exist. Now, I had concrete evidence that my instincts had been correct all along, and that the gaslighting and subtle manipulation I had been experiencing were part of a deliberate campaign to undermine my confidence and credibility. I spent the rest of that Wednesday in a state of controlled fury, going through the motions of normal work activities while my mind raced through the implications of what I had learned and the options available for responding to their conspiracy. The realization that I had just 9 days before Jessica planned to implement her scheme created an urgent timeline for developing my own counterattack. That evening, Mark came home acting perfectly normal, asking about my day and sharing casual conversation about Emma's college preparation activities. Watching him maintain his facade of caring husband while knowing about his active participation in Jessica's plan to destroy my career created a surreal cognitive dissonance that was almost unbearable. Every gesture of affection felt like another layer of deception. Every concerned question about my well-being seemed like intelligence gathering for their ongoing psychological assessment. I managed to maintain my own facade of normalcy that night, but internally I was already beginning to formulate a plan that would turn their own weapons against them. If Jessica wanted to make mental health and workplace fitness a public discussion, I would be happy to provide our colleagues with some very relevant information about professional ethics, conflicts of interest, and abuse of authority. Thursday. Morning brought a surge of determined energy as I began implementing my strategy for exposing their conspiracy. I had realized that Jessica's upcoming presentation about identifying mentally unfit employees would provide the perfect platform for revealing the corruption behind her assessment methods. The irony of using her own forum to expose her ethical violations felt like perfect poetic justice. I arrived at work early and spent several hours carefully documenting all the evidence I had gathered from their email correspondence. I created a comprehensive dossier that would demonstrate not only their romantic relationship, but the systematic abuse of Jessica's professional authority and the violation of employee privacy rights that had compromised the integrity of the entire wellness program. The evidence painted a clear picture of how Jessica had been using her position to conduct character assassinations disguised as wellness assessments, targeting employees that Mark wanted to marginalize or remove from the company. Her supposed expertise in identifying psychological problems was actually a cover for eliminating perceived threats to their relationship and career advancement plans. Sarah Chen noticed my focused intensity that morning and asked if everything was all right. I assured her that I was working on something important that would be revealed soon, and that I appreciated her friendship and support more than she could possibly know. Her genuine concern reminded me that there were people at Meridian who valued honesty and integrity, and that exposing Jessica and Mark's corruption would ultimately benefit everyone who worked there. Throughout Thursday, I observed their interactions. With new understanding, seeing the subtle signs of their intimate relationship that I had previously dismissed or rationalized away. The brief touches during conversations, the meaningful glances across meeting rooms, and the way they seemed to communicate through unspoken signals all took on obvious significance now that I understood the true nature of their connection. Jessica's behavior toward me had become increasingly aggressive over the past week, with small comments and suggestions that seemed designed to plant seeds of doubt about my mental stability and professional competence. Her wellness coordinator mask was slipping as she prepared to implement the final phase of her plan to have me declared unfit for my position. I also began to notice how Mark and Jessica had been working together to isolate me from potential allies within the company. They had been subtly undermining my relationships with other department heads by sharing concerns about my stress levels and suggesting that I might be struggling with personal issues that were affecting my work performance. This groundwork had been laid to ensure that Jessica's recommendations about my mental fitness would be received as credible rather than suspicious. Friday morning arrived with perfect autumn weather that seemed to promise a day of revelation and resolution. Jessica's presentation was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the Harmony conference room, with attendance expected from all department heads and most senior staff members. The timing couldn't have been better for maximum impact and the largest possible audience of witnesses. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a professional outfit that would project confidence and competence during what I knew would be the most important presentation of my career. Emma noticed my extra attention to appearance and commented that I seemed different somehow, more focused and determined than she had seen me in months. I told her that I had some important work to do that day and that she should be proud of the strength and integrity her mother had taught her to value. Mark left for work at his usual time, mentioning that he was looking forward to Jessica's presentation and expected it to be a significant milestone for the wellness program's future development. His anticipation was genuine because he believed they were about to successfully implement their scheme to remove me from the workplace and clear the path for their relationship to become public knowledge. The morning hours crawled by as I made final preparations for my counterattack against Jessica's presentation. I had prepared a brief but devastating response that would use her own professional standards and ethical guidelines to expose the corruption behind her wellness assessments and recommendations. The evidence I had gathered would speak for itself, requiring minimal commentary from me to demonstrate the scope of their conspiracy. At 1:30, I made my way to the Harmony conference room, arriving early to ensure I would have optimal positioning for addressing the audience when the moment came. Other employees were filing in with expressions of mild curiosity, expecting to hear routine updates about wellness program developments and perhaps some new initiatives for supporting employee mental health. The atmosphere in the room was relaxed and professional, with people chatting quietly about weekend plans and upcoming project deadlines. Nobody suspected that they were about to witness a confrontation that would expose months of carefully orchestrated deception and dramatically alter the professional landscape at Meridian Healthcare Solutions. Jessica entered the room at exactly 2 o'clock, looking polished and confident as she prepared to deliver what she believed would be her triumph over me. She was dressed in a sharp business suit that projected authority and expertise, carrying herself with the demeanor of someone who felt completely in control of the situation. Her presentation materials were organized in a professional portfolio, and she had prepared visual aids that would support her recommendations about identifying problematic employees. Mark took his seat in the executive section, where he could provide visible support for Jessica's presentation while observing my reactions to her allegations about my mental fitness. They had choreographed this moment carefully, expecting to catch me off guard and create a public scene that would validate their narrative about my declining psychological stability. Jessica began her presentation with general information about workplace mental health and the importance of identifying employees who might be struggling with issues that could impact their job performance or workplace safety. Her tone was professional and appropriately concerned, establishing herself as a caring advocate for employee well-being who had discovered some troubling patterns requiring immediate attention. As she moved into more specific territory about assessment methodologies and warning signs of mental instability, I could see her building toward the climactic moment when she would reveal her recommendations for specific interventions. The anticipation in her voice was barely concealed as she approached what she believed would be the successful culmination of months of careful planning and documentation. She clicked to a slide titled, "Immediate Action Required, High Priority Cases," and began discussing employees who had been identified as potentially dangerous to workplace productivity and morale. The room's attention focused intently as she explained her assessment criteria and the documentation she had gathered to support her recommendations for mandatory psychological evaluation and possible administrative leave. Then she reached the slide that contained my name, along with detailed allegations about behavioral indicators suggesting serious mental health concerns. The room fell silent as employees processed what they were seeing and hearing. Jessica's presentation had taken an unexpected turn from educational discussion to specific personnel accusations that seemed to emerge from nowhere. Several people looked confused about why individual employee names were being displayed publicly during what they had expected to be a general presentation about mental health resources. The professional atmosphere in the room shifted as people realized they were witnessing something far more serious and potentially damaging than routine wellness program updates. This was the moment I had been preparing for. I raised my hand and asked to address the room about Jessica's assessment methods and the evidence she had used to develop her recommendations about specific employees. Jessica's confident expression flickered momentarily before she agreed to take questions about her professional evaluation process, clearly expecting to easily defend her carefully prepared allegations. I stood and walked to the front of the room, carrying the folder containing months of printed email correspondence between Jessica and Mark. The silence was complete as I began speaking, my voice calm and clear despite the magnitude of what I was about to reveal to my colleagues and supervisors. I started by thanking everyone for their attention and acknowledging Jessica's presentation about workplace mental health concerns. Then I explained that I had discovered some additional information about Jessica's assessment methods that I believed the group should consider before accepting her recommendations about specific employees or implementing any of her suggested interventions. I opened my folder and began reading selected excerpts from Jessica and Mark's email correspondence, starting with messages that clearly documented their romantic relationship and moving systematically through their discussions about using her. Positioned to target employees for removal. The room remained absolutely silent as the true scope of their conspiracy became clear to everyone present. Jessica's face went completely white as I continued reading evidence of their plan to have me declared mentally unfit, including detailed strategies for documenting incidents that could be misinterpreted as psychological instability. Mark looked like he wanted to disappear entirely as months of careful deception collapsed in front of his colleagues and subordinates. I read excerpts from their messages about timing my wellness assessments to coincide with stressful periods, manipulating situations to create documentation of supposed emotional volatility, and researching legal precedents for removing employees based on mental health concerns. The systematic nature of their conspiracy became undeniable, as I presented evidence of their collaboration in every aspect of the scheme. The most damaging revelation came when I read their discussions about enjoying my unknowing participation in my own destruction, including their cruel jokes about my trusting nature and their satisfaction with how easily they had been able to manipulate my genuine concern for workplace wellness into a weapon against me. I concluded my presentation by noting that Jessica's wellness assessments had been fundamentally compromised by personal conflicts of interest, and that her recommendations about employee mental fitness should be completely disregarded, pending thorough investigation of her professional conduct. I suggested that the company might want to reconsider whether someone who had systematically abused their position to target personal enemies was qualified to make judgments about anyone's psychological fitness for employment. The aftermath of my revelation was immediate and decisive. Tom Rodriguez from Human Resources stood up and called for immediate suspension of the meeting pending formal investigation of the serious allegations I had presented. Security personnel were summoned to escort Jessica from the building while Mark sat in stunned silence, apparently unable to process how completely their carefully orchestrated scheme had backfired. Jessica attempted to protest that my accusations were unfounded and that my presentation itself demonstrated the mental instability she had been trying to address, but the concrete evidence I had provided made her denials sound desperate and unconvincing. The email correspondence spoke for itself, requiring no interpretation or analysis to demonstrate the scope of their professional misconduct and personal betrayal. Within hours, both Jessica and Mark had been suspended from their positions pending formal investigation of ethics violations, abuse of authority, and potential legal violations related to employee privacy and workplace harassment. The evidence I had provided was more than sufficient to support immediate action, and Meridian's legal department began preparing for potential criminal charges related to conspiracy and fraud. By Monday morning, Jessica's employment at Meridian Healthcare Solutions had been terminated for cause, eliminating any possibility of unemployment benefits or positive employment references. Mark had been demoted to a non-supervisory position with drastically reduced responsibilities and a significant salary reduction. The company also launched a comprehensive review of all wellness assessments Jessica had conducted to determine whether other employees had been targeted for personal rather than professional reasons. The investigation revealed that Jessica had been conducting similar character assassination campaigns against at least 3 other employees who she perceived as potential obstacles to her relationship with Mark or her career advancement within the company. Her abuse of her wellness coordinator position had been systematic and ongoing, representing a fundamental violation of professional ethics and employee trust. Emma's reaction to learning about her father's betrayal was initially shock and disappointment, but she quickly demonstrated the maturity and strength of character that made me proud to be her mother. She expressed disgust with Mark's willingness to participate in Jessica's scheme and wholehearted support for my decision to expose their conspiracy and end our marriage. The dissolution of my marriage proceeded with remarkable efficiency. Mark's participation in Jessica's plot to destroy my career had eliminated any possibility of reconciliation or trust rebuilding. I filed for divorce immediately, citing irreconcilable differences and seeking an equitable division of assets that would provide long-term financial security for Emma and myself. Mark offered minimal resistance to my divorce terms, apparently recognizing that his public humiliation and professional disgrace had left him with little leverage for negotiating favorable settlement conditions. His reputation within Austin's business community had been permanently damaged, and his career prospects had been severely limited by his demonstrated willingness to engage in unethical conduct. The legal proceedings moved quickly, with my attorney noting that Mark's documented participation in workplace conspiracy and harassment provided strong grounds for pursuing additional damages beyond standard divorce settlements. Within 6 months, our divorce was finalized with terms that ensured Emma's college education would be fully funded and that I would receive sufficient assets to maintain financial independence. My career at Meridian actually flourished following the exposure of Jessica and Mark's conspiracy. The executive team recognized that I had demonstrated exceptional integrity and courage in revealing corruption that could have seriously damaged the company's reputation and exposed them to significant legal liability. I was promoted to senior marketing director with expanded responsibilities and a substantial salary increase that reflected both my professional capabilities and the value of my loyalty to the company. The wellness program was completely restructured under new leadership that emphasized transparency, ethical conduct, and genuine employee support rather than personal agenda advancement. My experience became a case study used in corporate training, programs about recognizing and responding to workplace manipulation and abuse of authority. Emma continued to excel academically and socially throughout our transition to single-parent household dynamics, taking pride in her mother's strength and resilience while developing her own sense of independence and personal integrity. We grew closer through the experience of rebuilding our lives together, creating new traditions and routines that reflected our authentic values, rather than maintaining appearances for someone else's benefit. The transformation in our home environment was remarkable. Without Mark's presence creating underlying tension and deception, Emma and I were able to develop the kind of open, honest communication that had been impossible when we were walking on eggshells around his increasingly erratic behavior and secretive activities. Our dinner conversations became opportunities for genuine connection, rather than careful navigation around topics that might reveal inconvenient truths. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I learned through professional networks that Jessica had been unable to find employment in the wellness or corporate psychology field due to the detailed professional references documenting her termination from Meridian. Her scheme to advance her career by destroying mine had ultimately destroyed her own professional prospects, while leaving me stronger and more successful than I had ever been during my marriage. Mark made several attempts to reestablish contact during the first year after our divorce, apparently hoping to rebuild some kind of relationship, or at least reduce the animosity between us for Emma's sake. However, his betrayal had been so complete and calculated that forgiveness seemed both impossible and unnecessary. I had moved beyond anger into indifference, focusing my energy on building a positive future rather than relitigating a painful past. The experience taught me invaluable lessons about trusting my instincts, recognizing manipulation techniques, and understanding that sometimes the people closest to us are capable of far greater deception than we ever imagined possible. It also demonstrated that intelligence, integrity, and courage can overcome even the most carefully planned betrayal when we refuse to accept gaslighting and psychological manipulation as normal relationship dynamics. Emma often tells me how proud she is of the way I handled the crisis with her father and Jessica, and how my example taught her to value personal integrity and authentic relationships over security and social convenience. She has developed strong boundaries and excellent judgment about people's character, skills that will serve her well throughout her life and protect her from the kind of manipulation I experienced. Today, as Emma prepares for her senior year of high school and college applications, I reflect on how dramatically our lives have improved since escaping the toxic dynamics that had been slowly poisoning our family relationships. The woman who tried to destroy my mental health and professional reputation inadvertently gave me the greatest gift possible: the motivation and opportunity to discover my own strength and resilience. My career continues to advance at Meridian, where I have become known as someone who combines creative marketing expertise with ethical leadership and the ability to navigate complex professional challenges with grace and determination. The experience of exposing corruption and rebuilding my life has given me a reputation for integrity and reliability that has opened doors to opportunities I never could have imagined during the years when I was focused primarily on supporting someone else's ambitions. Looking back on that devastating Wednesday morning when I discovered Jessica and Mark's conspiracy, I realize it was actually the beginning of my liberation from a relationship that had been gradually diminishing my sense of self-worth and personal agency. Their betrayal forced me to reclaim my strength and independence, ultimately leading to a life that is more authentic, fulfilling, and aligned with my core values than anything I experienced during 12 years of marriage. The wellness coordinator, who thought she could manipulate me into professional and personal destruction, underestimated the power of truth, integrity, and a woman who refuses to be gaslit into accepting someone else's version of reality. Sometimes the worst betrayal becomes the catalyst for the best transformation, when we have the courage to turn our pain into power and our victimization into victory over those who sought to destroy us. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.